Okay, so we have our delete working, but we haven't idiot proofed it. We do need to add a JavaScript confirmation. We'll use some jQuery. Now we actually have jQuery already loaded in here. When we set up our master page back many weeks ago, we added Bootstrap, we created our nav bar, and we also linked to the jQuery CDN. So we have jQuery available to us, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I want to add a class on here. So we want to set the control style CSS class. This will attach a class onto those delete links. I'm going to attach a class on called confirmation. And then we'll write a small script file that uses jQuery that will attach a JavaScript pop-up window onto any element with that class. I've just added this property here. So we're going to have to write our own front-end JavaScript file that will use jQuery and look for any element with the class of confirmation. So I'm just going to make a new subfolder. I'm going to click my project, and I'm going to choose Add New Folder. And I'll just call that folder JS. So any front-end JavaScripts we'll put in a JS folder. And then in here, I'll right-click my new JS folder. We'll add a new item. And I just want a JavaScript file. You could call it anything you like. I'll just call it scripts.js. And we'll do just a little bit of client-side scripting. Pardon? Yep. I did. Thank you. So again, I made a new folder. We don't have to put it in a subfolder. It's a good idea usually to put our JavaScripts in a separate subfolder. I'm doing this from memory. I may have to change it. I think actually that might be a... So when the user clicks any element, any HTML element with the class of confirmation, we want to use JavaScript to display a pop-up message that says, are you sure you want to delete this? And this confirm method in JavaScript automatically generates an OK and a cancel button in that pop-up. The cancel button will return false. So if the user clicks cancel, the action is canceled. If the user clicks OK, that returns true. So our JavaScript, our link will carry on as normal. Visual Studio is telling me my syntax is okay. I'm not entirely sure about it. My client-side JavaScript's a little bit rusty. But now we also need to attach this script file into our master page. Right now, we've written this file, but it's not connected to anything. So if we click our delete link right now, we still won't get any confirmation. We now need to link this JavaScript file in. Let's put it on our master page, because that way, as we build out the application, we can reuse this script. If we want a JavaScript confirmation for deleting on anything else, we just have to give that HTML element a class of confirmation, and it will automatically inherit this script. So we'll go back to our site master file. So open up your master page. Where should we link in our JavaScript file? Should put it in the header. Yeah, why do we need to put it after jQuery? Why can't I put it before the jQuery?
Because
jQuery has to be referenced first. So after jQuery, we'll add in our own So this is our own.
Would you be safer to put it after the Bootstrap JavaScript?
I guess we could. Probably not a bad idea, because we don't necessarily know all the things Bootstrap is doing. So that's probably a good point, Margot. I'm not sure it really matters, but to be safe, yes, that's probably wise to put our own file last. Thanks for that. Good suggestion. So now if we go back and refresh our departments page and we click delete, hopefully we're going to get a little JavaScript asking us if we're sure we want to delete. So now if I click delete, okay, well, that didn't really work as expected.
maybe you don't need to use the folder.js in that way. You delete now the script text. Because I don't see that we create JS folder. When you see on the source, you have the JS folder and not the script.js.
Okay, let's have a look. Mind you, didn't say it wasn't found. If I click on it, it does find it, so the issue has to be with the script we wrote. Let's just check one other thing. We want to make sure, okay, our links do all have a class of confirmation. Yes, yeah, I think you're right. I had it in there, but I had it in the wrong place. I think it's there. We'll try it again. Thank you. I think that was our fix, but we'll try again. So I'll reload. There. Now our jQuery is attaching that pop-up because we've given it a class of confirmation. So if I click cancel, which returns false, nothing happens. If I click OK on computer studies, so that's ID 24. I think somebody else deleted it at the same time because we're working on the same data. Well, let's try, maybe. Yeah. So now if we want to delete anything else anywhere in our application, all we have to do is give that element a confirmation class and it will invoke our jQuery script. Okay, so I was missing the dot here. Thanks, Thomas. Good catch. And we'll see this syntax. I assume you're seeing this syntax a fair bit in your class with Jesse. You guys talked about callback structures with JavaScript. We've got a function here as a parameter of another one, and the function has no name. Have you seen this in Jesse's class yet? Anonymous functions, okay. We'll do this a lot next semester when we do Node.js. It's all gonna have this structure with anonymous callback functions. Okay. I know we're not really doing a front-end JavaScript course here. You guys have your class with Jesse for that, but it's good we can use a tool like that to add functionality we need in here. So we're 3/4 of the way here with create, read, update, delete. Only thing we haven't done now is update. Now we don't need any new pages for update. So what we want to do, our last piece here is we want to add an edit column in here. And when the user clicks edit, we want to take them to this page, except this page should be filled out, right? It should have the department name, it should have the budget. And when the user hits save, right now, every time we fill it out, it's going to add a new department. So we need to check that if it's an existing department, we want to do an update instead of adding a new record. Just before I move on, anybody have any questions about our delete before we do edit and update?
As I understand this confirmation, we could make without jQuery just.
Yep. It's just we've made a kind of a generic reusable script. So we can use this anywhere. And in fact, if we went and looked at our PHP application from last semester, I bet you we created a file with the exact same script, right? It's just front-end JavaScript. So it's reusable. It's probably right here. It's a different one. I'm sure we have it. Yeah, we called it app.js. There's our script we did in PHP. It's exactly the same. Right, so nicely reusable because it's independent from the front end language. Right, when we do our Node application next semester, we'll use the same thing. So handy library to have. Okay, so let's go back to our departments page. Usually we want our delete button to be last. So between budget and delete, I want to add a new column. So we want to have department ID, name, budget, edit, and delete is typically at the end. So we're going to use a different kind of field. In this case, we actually want an ASP hyperlink field. We want to generate a link here, and we want the department ID attached onto the end of those links. I'm going to pick ASP hyperlink field, and we're going to set a bunch of properties here. We're going to set the header text as edit. We'll set the text also as edit. We'll just start there. We'll kind of build this one piece at a time. So if I reload my page in the browser, we should get a bunch of edit links that don't go anywhere yet. So we've got these links. I can't click on them because we have yet to specify what page they should link to. So we need to add some more properties onto line 14. The next property we need is called the navigate URL. That's the server-side equivalent of the href property. It will render out as an href property. So I'm going to pick that property, navigate URL equals, and we want it to link to department details. So I can just pick it. So far our header says edit, our links say edit, and they're going to go to our department detail page. If you save and refresh, the links should now be clickable and they should load our next page. So now when I click, we get our form.
I have a question real quick. Why don't we use command field and use show edit button? It's one of the options.
Good question. We could use it. The ASP grid view actually allows you to edit right in the grid. So that would mean if we use the command field and with show edit button, what will actually happen when we click it, and I probably have an example online somewhere, is rather than linking to a new page, we could turn this into a text box and this into a text box and actually edit right on this page, which we can do. I don't like doing it. I've done it before. I don't like doing it for a couple reasons. The first one is usually we have more columns in the grid. So to make that grid and put like drop downs or text boxes in every place, the page gets very wide. It's also hard. Then we have to add all the validation rules into the grid. We already have this page set up with all the right controls and all the right validation. You can, in fact, I'll just show you what it looks like. I just find they're really messy when you edit right in the grid. Might look something like that. So you actually just do it right here. But whenever I've done it, I've found the pages are hard to work with, and I've usually wound up removing that feature. So if we add a command field edit, that's the idea, that we're not editing on a separate page. We're actually putting the input controls into the selected row and letting the user make changes right here. Okay, so you may want to do it, and you can even do it. The grid view actually has a property. If I look here, it has a property somewhere in here where we can actually add a row in the footer. So you could put text boxes right in your footer and someone could add a new department right in here. If you want a single page application, you can do it. The grid view is designed for that. I just find it makes for messy applications. Okay, so now we're linking to the right page, but we have to pass in the ID. So I'm just going to go down to the next line. I'm still inside my hyperlink column. So we need to set up, when I hit the space bar, I get this little pop-up. We need to set up two other properties which have really long, goofy, complicated names. The first one is this one, the data navigate URL fields. What this means is what fields are we attaching on the link as parameters. So I'm going to pick that. We only want to pass one parameter to the link. We need to pass the department ID. So we want that value on the end of our link so our next page knows what department record to look up. So if I add that and refresh, we won't see any changes yet. Now we have to get to the world's most ridiculous property name. So we now need to format the URL with this property. I'm not going to type it. I'm going to select it from the list. Most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in Visual Studio. The data, navigate, URL, format, string. So this defines what the link format is actually going to look like. How do we append on? So it's going to look like this. I have to put it on its own line. It's so long. This is we need to specify the entire format of the URL, and the 0 in curly brackets, that represents our first parameter. So that will be replaced by the department ID. It was messy doing this in PHP. It's messy doing this in ASP.NET. I'll just try it and make sure we get the right result. So this is what we want. When I click the first one, we want the details page, and we want a key called department ID filled with the right ID number. If I click on ID 19, it appends that ID onto the end.
Want to pass that more than one parameter? We need that attribute multiple times, or like?
No, good question. So let's say we wanted to pass the department name as well. Notice this property URL fields, it's plural. So it's a collection. So we could do it like this. And then here we need to say and name equals, and instead of 0, the 1 represents the second field. So that's how you would pass multiple values. We don't need to pass the name. We only really need to pass the ID.
Why they didn't make it like multiple times?
I've yet to figure this out. It's been like this since 2002. It's worked like this for 14 years. They haven't changed it. I don't know why. So we don't need the name, so I'll take that part out, but that's how we would do it if you want to pass multiple values. The other thing that we sometimes do, and Rob, I'm coming back to your question from earlier. Let's say those ID values are hidden, right? We don't want the users to actually see the IDs, but we need to pass it. In that case, we do a couple things. The first thing is we could have the ID in our grid, but we could actually make this, you don't have to do this, I'm just showing you for illustration. If we make the ID value false in our grid, it's still here, we're still tracking it in C#, but the end users can't see the ID numbers. So that would be one step. If I refresh my grid, the ID numbers are still here, but the end users won't see them, right? We've hidden the column. But if I click, the ID numbers you see in the status bar, they're still here. So what we would typically do in that case is we'd encrypt them on the link. So as we're binding the grid, rather than displaying those ID numbers in plain text, we encrypt them. So That would look something like this. Let's see. Our code looks something like this. As we're binding the data to the grid, as each item is being added to the grid, I'm getting the ID number using the data key, the same way we did in our delete, and I'm calling an encrypt function. So instead of that ID number showing up in plain text on the end of those links, it's an encrypted value. So that way users can't just change the number and get access to a record they're not supposed to see. Or maybe we just want to hide the ID numbers in general so the user can't manipulate them. That's one way of doing it. We'll leave that part out, kind of beyond the scope of what we need to do in here. Okay, so our department page is now done. We have our delete working with our JavaScript confirmation. We have our edit link that's loading the right page and passing the proper ID. We're not going to worry about the fact that those IDs are visible right now. Go back, I'll get my ID numbers here. We'll assume whoever has access to this page is allowed to do everything, so the fact they can access those ID numbers isn't the problem. So now we need some code on this page. Now this page we're already using for adding, but we were using it for editing as well. So the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out, are we adding a new one and are we showing a blank form? Or are we editing an existing department and we want to show a form that's already been filled out with the existing values? So how, when the page loads, how do we know the difference? How can we tell if we're adding or editing?
By showing the values in the text box.
Yeah, we will show the values in the text box. So how do we know whether we have any values to show? Let me just go this way. I'll open two tabs. Okay. So what's different? Right. The URL, if we have an ID, Prabjit, you're right. If we have an ID, we're going to need to query the database and get the name and department, the name and budget, and put them in the text boxes. If we have no ID, we don't have to do anything when the page loads. We just let the user see the blank form. Okay. We did the same thing in PHP. We had an if statement. We checked the get value for an ID. And if we had an ID, we ran a query to get the existing values so we could put them in our form. So that's going to be the first thing. If we go back to our department details, we'll take a break in a minute. If I open up my department details, remember every page has a built-in page load event. So that's where we're going to write this condition. When the page loads, we're going to check the URL for a department ID. And if we find one, we're going to need to set up a query to go and fetch that department and then populate the text boxes. If we have no ID, we don't need to do anything on page load. We just display a blank form instead. So we'll need an if statement here. And then the last thing we're going to need is an if statement here. A lot of this code is actually going to be identical for doing insert and update. What will we need to do inside of here? How will we know if we're adding a new department or updating an existing one? Because right now, this code, if we run it, it's going to add a new one every time. That would be one way of doing it, yeah.
We're being past the primary key value of the ID, we just assume it's the one we would change.
Right, just like on page load, we're going to check the URL for an ID. When the user hits save, if we have an ID, we'll fill that ID into our object, and then we won't we just won't call add. Add will create a new object. If we call save changes and we have an ID number, Entity Framework will automatically do an update. So we just need an if statement in here with a couple lines of code. The rest of it we'll leave alone. And then everything will be finished. And we'll have the full create, read, update, and delete done. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break here. So when we come back, we just need to add, all we need to do is about maybe 10 or 12 lines of C# on this page to get update to work. So we'll do that in 10 minutes.